computer. There we go. I'm good, so I will see if I can get my picture out of here. Good, you did it.
Well, folks, at just about 7:30 on what is quite a snowy evening, I would like to welcome you to the bird study group as conducted monthly by the Hamilton Naturalist Club. The HNC falls within a very important boundary. We recognize the long history of First Nations and Métis people in the province of Ontario and pay respect to the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the holder of the treaty with the Crown for the lands that we steward. I'm speaking to you today from the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron, Wendat nations. And under 41 centimeters of snow, my name is Jackson Hudecki, and I am the Bird Study Group Director for the Hamilton Naturalist Club. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you so much for being here, for contributing to the natural world that the Hamilton Naturalist Club helps to preserve and protect. We do this every month. We host 2 virtual meetings a month. There is a general meeting held on the second Monday of each month, and then there's a bird study group meeting, just about birds only, held on the third Monday of every month. And we're in year 2 of hosting these virtually, and it's going to stay that way for a while yet. And I'm kind of glad that we are, because who would have wanted to travel tonight somewhere? We probably would have had to cancel this if we were meeting in person. So meeting virtually allows us to stay comfortable in our own homes, wearing the clothes that we were shoveling in. And yeah, what a storm. Well, our first big storm of the year. So hopefully everyone's okay. Yeah, we do this every month. We do it virtually, and we bring in special guests, and the special guests chat with us for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, depending on their topic. And I hope you have questions. I hope you are already thinking of things to ask our special guest tonight. You can use, and I'm kind of worried, I don't know if we've instituted the chat function tonight, and perhaps we haven't. So if you have something to say, throw it in the Q&A. Very informal, so you can just kind of throw whatever you want in the Q&A, whether it's a comment for me or for the presenters. But if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A, and we will do our best to ask that and to get that going. Because yeah, usually we do have a chat. I think I have to do that. I thought I set that up in Zoom. Anyway, so the bird studies group is a way for us to just kind of bring people together to talk about birds. And that's a topic near and dear to my heart. So we want to just allow us to talk about it virtually or in person and away from the field for a moment. And on a variety of different topics. And what we'd like to do is amplify the voices, the brains, the ingenuity of the folks in our community. Because our community is vast, our community is huge. There are so many people and organizations all working together and separately, but working to learn as much as they can about the world that is around us and about the biodiversity that is in this region. Southern Ontario has an incredible array of biodiversity, and we're here to celebrate that. Even in the winter, even when it is minus 20 outside like it was last week. What are you seeing? What are you noticing? It is a new year. We last met like December 13th, I think it was, or 15th. Yeah, the 13th. And so we're in a new year. What was your first of year bird? What was the first thing you encountered on January 1st this year? Are you a winter birder? Are you a winter lister? You know, again, I was hoping to get the chat going a little bit, but I don't know if that's possible. So throw it in the Q&A, because the birds are aplenty. We know this. And I think the rarest bird around right now is the glaucous winged gull. So many thanks to Dave Archbell. You can find him on Instagram at Dave Archbell to check out a photo and his photos of birds. Great photographer. Here we have a western glaucous winged gull that everyone a lot of people I knew were going to Barrie to see this bird. They needed to travel a little bit to find it. And then sure enough, it has shown up in the Hamilton study area, and it frequents from Hamilton to Brantford and back, and it has been doing that quite a bit. So have you seen the glaucous winged gull? But lots of cool birds showing up. We know, and if you're new here, if you're new to birding, we know that winter is a great time for waterfowl and for gulls. So perhaps you've seen some of these birds, and some of the unusual, cool, noteworthy ones are harlequin ducks, king eiders, black surf scoters, white-winged scoters, snow geese. I should have put Ross's goose on there because a couple of those have shown up. I know since our last meeting, people have been seeing things like northern saw-whet owls, but then there was like a one-day boreal owl that showed up. So that's kind of cool. White-winged crossbill has been seen in the HSA kind of infrequently, not as much as I thought we would be seeing by now. So hopefully we do start seeing more of those, because I've yet to see a white-winged crossbill, so I'd like to tick that off my lifer list. There's a mountain bluebird in Guelph. It showed up in early December, and I only kind of caught wind of it last week or a week and a half ago or so. Another western bird that has shown up here, and I remember seeing some chatter on Discord about a bunch of big storms that were rolling through, and people kept saying, keep an eye out for prairie birds showing up in the HSA. And I thought that would be pretty cool. So perhaps the glaucous winged gull and the mountain bluebird have shown up from the west as part of some storms that occurred here in the fall. We know the Harris's sparrow is continuing in Hamilton, which is cool. A bunch of northern shrike sightings. Someone saw a rough-legged hawk like near the end of December there. So lots of cool things. What are you seeing? In the Q&A, Peter Thomas said, my 2022 first of year was a bunch of American goldfinch, rather than ring-billed gull, which was his first of year last year. I woke up to 2 screaming blue jays out my window in downtown Hamilton in the Strathcona neighborhood. So that was my first of year birds. So what was yours? Let me know in the Q&A. If you are looking to get involved throughout COVID, the pipits have continued to gather virtually and somewhat in person, quite safely, of course. If you would like to connect with a beginner group of birds, connect with Colleen Riley. I know there's some business going on with that group right now, looking to make that a private group or a membership-based group. So some cool things happening with the pipits. But if you wanted to continue your education on raptors specifically, wonderful birder and friend Catherine Manshot is offering a 7-week webinar series hosted through the Niagara Peninsula Hawkwatch team. And it is gonna cover the raptors that occur in Ontario, which is pretty great. Very reasonable price for a 7-week program, which starts on January 20th. So if you are looking to beef up your raptor identification and just learn a little bit more about raptors in Ontario, this is a virtual program for you. And look at that, look at the proceeds are even going to the Niagara Peninsula Hawkwatch team. So very cool program. I highly suggest you take this on. I was once, I don't want to say bested, I was once put on the spot by the former bird study group director, Bruce McKenzie, once, when he was like, Jackson, what tree is that? We were on a hike once. And I was like, isn't that a larch species? He's like, yeah, is it North American or European? And I realized right then and there, my naturalist skills are not up to snuff. So I'm currently taking a master naturalist program offered by Lakehead University, which occurs on every Thursday for the next like 9 weeks. But if I wasn't taking that, I would definitely take this with Catherine Manshot. So definitely look into that. You can reach out to me or to Catherine if you have not written down kdeeroff@yahoo.ca. Keith needs to know who you are and that you're registering for this program. Bob and Jean, hey, how's it going from the Peninsula Field Naturalist? Brown thrasher yesterday in Niagara Lake. That is a cool sighting. And Dina says 8 dark-eyed juncos on January 1st was their first of year bird. Amazing. Brown thrasher in Niagara on the Lake. That is an unusual sighting for January, that's for sure. Hey, Keith, no problem. I hope lots of you will take this Raptor ID course because it looks like a lot of fun. And again, Catherine's super pleasant, so she is bound to instill a whole new passion on everybody. So I've lifted this from Club President Bill Lamond, who hosted our monthly meeting last week. And it was talking about the results of the Christmas bird count that was held on 3 different dates in the Hamilton study area on Boxing Day and December 30th and January 2nd. These are preliminary results, so some things are still trickling in. 91 species observed on Boxing Day, down from the record-breaking 107 species found just a year ago. The Flamborough, which was the first ever Flamborough Christmas bird count. 48 ravens was the highlight there, 61 species on December 30th, and the Peachtree countdown in Grimsby on January 2nd, 64 species. These are efforts to get people out in the field birding when it's cold outside. So this is a good time if you're a beginner birder to learn a bit about some species that are around right now, especially before the hundreds of species arrive in the spring for migration. Okay, so the Bird Friendly Cities team have closed their nominations for city birds. If you weren't aware of this, Nature Canada is conducting this nationwide campaign to get and to certify municipalities as bird-friendly cities. And Hamilton and Burlington have combined their efforts to kind of get certifications for both of those cities, because we're right here at the tip of Lake Ontario, and so they're striving to certify both those municipalities as bird-friendly cities. And one of the initiatives is to nominate city birds, and we don't have any for this area. So for a good long while, nominations were open. Anyone could submit what birds they thought represented Hamilton or Burlington. Those have now closed. There is a group there's a group that will be shortlisting, and then the public can vote on the shortlisted birds. So look out for that coming out in the next couple of weeks, and that will narrow down the process to getting to a city bird for both Hamilton and Burlington. So hopefully you submitted something. I know I submitted something, a gritty city bird. We'll see if it makes it to the short list, and we'll talk about that later on. Lots of great resources to get into the birding community in the Hamilton study area, whether it's with the Naturalist Club, whether it's with one of the conservation authorities, whether it's through RBG. Lots of birding to be had. I have thought of a couple more podcasts, and it just slipped my mind to get them through onto here. Our Google group listservs, there's a lot of postings that happen there. A lot of things occurring on Discord with either the Hamilton Naturalist Club or Ontario Birds. Lots to see, lots to check out. Become a member if you're not. We'd love to have you as part of the Hamilton Naturalist Club. We've got some big years ahead of us, and as populations continue to grow, protecting the environment is a huge effort, and that is something that the HNC strives for, is protecting, preserving, and educating people on nature. So we'd love to have you as members. That would be great. And you can get yourself involved. You can volunteer on a wide array of capacities. You can join a board with us if you've got some communications background. We'd love to have you as a communications director. You'd be working alongside me and some other cool people, so let us know. And as well, Bill is looking to kind of pass off his role with the wood duck. So some cool chances for folks to get involved with nature in the community. Nathan Badger, Golden Crown Sparrow near Ayr. Is that the second or the third? That would be, I know that there's at least 2 Golden Crown Sparrows around. And Colleen says, oh, the Pippins is not just for beginners. Sorry, Colleen, you're right. It's not just for beginners. Thank you for that. It's for birders of every stage. We'd love to connect with you on a multitude of facets. If you need to reach out to me, birdstudygroup@hamiltonnature.org. You can email me there or through here tonight through the Q&A. Just let me know. We're going to meet we're going to meet February, March, April, and May. We have 4 more meetings before we take a break for June, July, and August. So in March, we're going to be hearing from the Bird Friendly Cities team, so that'd be great. In April, we're going to be hearing from the Feminist Bird Club, and in May is going to be a bit of a community update, so that should be fun. More details on that. May feels like it's 7 years from now, so I won't even think about it yet. Next month, and I'm just going to quickly go, okay, next month, a good friend of mine, Peter Tome, recommended this particular group to talk to the HNC, and we reached out, and sure enough, Scott Wiedensaw from Project Snowstorm is going to be delivering a presentation on snowy owls, which if you're new to birding, SNOW is the 4-letter kind of banding code for snowy owls. And we've been seeing a lot in the HSA. There's been a couple hanging around the bay, which has been pretty great. So join us next month. It's not the 3rd Monday next month. That is Family Day. And we decided to push it to the last day of the month, I think, in February. Yep. So on Monday, February 28th, will be the next bird study group meeting. So not the 3rd Monday as per usual, but the 4th. We hope you'll join us. Snowy owls are incredible. So that's the next several months of bird study group. But you're here tonight, 75 of you in the room, to hear from a very wonderful person. And I might be biased in saying that, but we're gonna hear from Jane Spero. So Jane is the conservation breeding coordinator for the Loggerhead Shrike program in Ontario. Her role involves everything from organizing bird transfers between partner facilities to banding and collecting samples from juveniles before release. Jane has a passion for songbird conservation and feels as though she has landed her dream role. Jane holds a master's degree in animal biosciences from U of G, where she studied building collision injuries in migratory songbird species, which she gave a talk to the HNC in September of 2019. So she's not new to the bird study group. And before her time as breeding coordinator, Jane worked as a rehabilitation supervisor at the Toronto Wildlife Centre, where she was responsible for the care, treatment, and reintroduction of injured and orphaned wildlife. Jane was a colleague of mine at RBG for a little bit as well, but she's also my cousin. So I'm so excited to have Jane join us tonight. So Jane, if you're here, I'll stop sharing my screen. You can turn your camera and your microphone on, and you can take over. And here she comes. So let's all put our hands together for Jane Spero. Woo!
Thank you so much, Jackson, for that introduction. Incidentally, my first of the year bird, get this, was a pair of great horned owls duetting. I mean, I didn't see them, but I did hear them. I went outside 6 o'clock in the morning. I hear them duetting across the road, and it was so fantastic. And I thought, well, this means 2022 is going to be a good year.
That is an amazing first of year bird. Thank you for sharing that and for making us all jealous. I'll turn off my camera. I'll turn off my microphone. The floor is yours, Jane.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so let me share my screen. Just give me one moment here. So I do want to apologize in advance. I am reporting from Durham region, and we're having like gale force winds over here. So so my audio might be choppy at times, but if worst comes to worst, I can always just kind of turn my camera off. Sometimes that helps with the connection. So I will just get a little message from Jackson if that is the case. And hopefully that will keep things running smoothly. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much again, Jackson, for having me. Thank you, Hamilton Naturalist Club, for having me. I'm so excited to once again be a special guest in the speaker series. I hope everyone had a fun snow day. The last time I spoke to everyone, like Jackson said, it was a very different world. It was September of 2019. I remember it was very hot. I spoke a little bit about my master's research, and then I gave an overview of the recovery program that I am a part of. But yeah, since then we've all had a bit of a wild ride, I must say. But we carry on, and the Loggerhead Shrike recovery program carries on. It's still going strong, and I'm still so happy to be a part of it. So Tonight, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the recovery program, I'm just going to give a bit of an overview about who we are and what we do. And then for everyone, especially those of you who I had the pleasure of speaking to in 2019, I'm going to give you some program updates, including some wild population numbers from this past year, some new research that has come out over the past couple of years, and give you just a little bit of an inside scoop on some of the amazing loggerhead shrike sightings that sent all of us a twitching this past year. So let's get right into it. Hopefully I don't have any technical issues this time around. Okay, so I would first like to talk a little bit about Wildlife Preservation Canada, or WPC for short, to sort of set the stage. So our organization was founded in 1985 by a famous naturalist named Gerald Durrell. And he was especially concerned with species at risk, or those species whose populations were in decline. And he wanted to ensure that these animals had advocate organizations around the world. So from that goal, he established WPC in Canada, as well as two sister organizations, one in the US and one in the UK. So what makes WPC different from other, nonprofit conservation organizations? We're dedicated to the recovery of endangered species, especially. So here are some of the animals that we have been working with or are currently working with, and they either have been or are currently endangered here in Canada, and WPC has had some sort of hand in helping them. So we've worked with everything from piping plovers to Taylor's checker spot butterflies, and we work across all sort of terrestrial taxa of animals, the only requirements being that they are designated a species at risk and that there isn't already a recovery program that exists for them. So again, what makes us different? Our role is to kind of get in there and get our hands dirty. We provide a direct sort of hands-on approach to helping species recover. So there are many animals out there who, will do well with habitat protection and conservation, but our focus is on those animals who need just that little bit of extra kind of hands-on help, in addition to their conserving their habitat, because that's always a big piece. So some of these hands-on activities include conservation, breeding, and release programs, where animals are raised at a zoo or aquarium and then released into the wild where populations of their kind are not doing too well. We also do reintroduction of animals into areas from which they've disappeared completely. And then, of course, we also have a hand in restoring or enhancing existing habitat. So hopefully these slides are coming up okay. Jackson, just give me a holler if they're not. So, well, I could very well sit here for hours and talk to you about each and every one of our programs. I'm here today to talk about our longest running recovery program, which is that for the loggerhead shrike. So WPC has been coordinating shrike recovery efforts in Ontario since 2003, when we took over the lead role for Environment Canada. So let's set the stage for this fascinating bird. For those of you who are not yet familiar with it, I know a lot of you are. So loggerhead shrikes are songbirds. They're about the size of a robin. They have a thick sort of black mask across their eyes, and they have a slate gray back. Altogether, a very pretty but stern looking bird. I think this photo on the top right is maybe the saturation is turned up a little bit. When I was looking at it earlier today, I thought, it looks very blue, but They're more of a kind of a slate gray, very, very pretty. They typically build their nests in dense, sort of thorny shrubs, where they'll be protected from predators, and they can lay up to a brood of 7 young. Okay, so shrikes are definitely most famous for their breeding, or sorry, for their feeding habits, since they are a fully predatory songbird. So they will eat mainly invertebrates, but they can also use their powerful sort of raptor-like beak to take vertebrate prey, which can include anything from, small mammals like mice or voles. They can take on things like amphibians or reptiles, even other songbirds, but they do like their invertebrate prey, like this lovely little field cricket here. What's really neat about shrikes is that they've been known to kill almost up to 1.5 times their weight. And when they have these larger prey items, they can kill them quite quickly by severing their spinal cord, which shrikes do with a special notch on their beak, which is a feature that they share with falcons and other birds of prey. And because unlike birds of prey, because they lack those kind of the strong feet and large talons of true birds of prey, if something is too big to eat in one bite, they'll actually impale it on a thorn or barbed wire to hold it while they sort of rip it into pieces. And this is how they've been given their name, butcher bird, which is very gruesome because they display some gruesome behavior. But they'll do this also to, or it's thought that they practice this behavior to create sort of a larder to attract and impress females to kind of claim their territory. Because you will often find some impaled items that are not eaten. But altogether, they're a very, very cool bird because they're tool users, which is really neat. And I just had to include this as well. It's especially cute because the young will sort of practice this behavior by impaling leaves or blades of grass, which is really, really cute to see. And another interesting thing about shrikes that some of you may not know, because they have feeding habits like that of a small raptor, they also will regurgitate pellets made of all the little indigestible parts of their prey, as raptors do. Your very own Jackson Hudecki was able to film a northern shrike regurgitating a pellet at Princess Point, I think, just a couple weeks ago. So really, really cool, pretty gross, but mostly pretty cool. So speaking of northern shrikes, northern shrikes are the only other species of shrike that you'll find in Canada. So they do have some overlap in habitat, but they're generally separated by the season. So the loggerhead shrike can be found in Ontario during the spring and the summer breeding seasons, whereas the northern shrike, as their name implies, breeds at the northern edge of the boreal forest, but can be found here in this area during the winter. So there's often sort of that period of overlap in the spring when loggerheads will come up from their southern wintering grounds and northern shrikes haven't really moved yet to their northern breeding grounds. And that's kind of where ID gets quite tricky. So these two pictures are pretty good sort of diagnostic images of what makes a northern shrike and a loggerhead a loggerhead. A northern is pictured on the left here. So you can see a northern shrike will have sort of a more of a barred chest, whereas a loggerhead shrike will be kind of a nice plain, or I should say an adult loggerhead shrike will have a nice kind of plain white chest. For northern shrikes, you can see their mask is somewhat on the thinner size compared to a loggerhead shrike. So especially between the eye and the nares, or the base of the beak. You can see if you look closely at the beak as well, the loggerhead shrike's beak is all the way black, whereas a northern shrike's beak, you can kind of see it's a little lighter at the base of the mandible there, the bottom of the beak. Also, northern shrikes, they have sort of a bit more of a chonker or a clonker or whatever you call it, a thicker beak, and loggerheads, as the name implies, they're a little bit more of a bobblehead, whereas a northern shrike looks a little bit more proportional. So just to make sure that everyone is listening, they have not yet fallen asleep. Jackson and I did not prepare any polls or anything like that, but I just want you to sort of answer this in your heads. Looking at this picture here, would you say this is a northern shrike? I know many of you are probably better than me at IDing your northern shrikes and your loggerhead shrikes, but just answer this in your head. Is this a northern head or a northern shrike or a loggerhead shrike? So this is a northern shrike. So you can see his chest is barred, and he's got sort of a thinner mask, and we have a close-up of the beak, and the beak you can see is not all the way black. But of course, unless you have a really good camera, this is kind of more so what your sightings are going to look like. So this was a picture that was taken by me in the spring of last year. Myself and our program's lead biologist, Hazel Wheeler, was given a tip that there was a shrike seen at an existing habitat patch in Carden, but this was mid-March of last year, and loggerhead shrikes are one of the first songbirds to return to their breeding grounds in the spring in Ontario. So they can be seen as early as sort of mid-March in the early springtime. So we thought, oh yeah, let's go and see if we can find this shrike. And lo and behold, we found a shrike. I took this horrible picture through the scope. So see if you can, just based on this picture, see if you can make out whether or not it's a northern shrike or a loggerhead shrike. And I can zoom in a little bit. It's easier to see with this one. So when we first saw this bird, we were so gung-ho that it was a loggerhead. We were seeing it, it was right around that time that it could have been a northern shrike still hanging around, not yet moved north, or it could have been a loggerhead. So we thought at first that we did have a loggerhead on our hands, but then when we looked more closely, especially with this photo here, you can see that the mask is on the thinner side. It has a bit of a chunkier beak. So the more we looked, the more we observed, we realized we were looking at a northern shrike, which was still very, very cool. But anywho, back to loggerhead shrikes. They can be found throughout North America, mainly in the United States. You can see here in this map that a very small breeding population can be found in Ontario and Quebec. So this population is actually a unique subspecies known as the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike, which is classified as critically endangered in Canada, and it's the subspecies that WPC is trying to recover. Oh, there he is there. So there are a number of subspecies of loggerheads in North America, though they all pretty well look the same. To see the difference, you actually need to look at their DNA. So in the 1930s, there were 11 subspecies that were designated, which you can see here in this numbered in the numbered sections of this map that are outlined in black. So From this, Ontario shrikes were part of number 5, the migrans subspecies, which had a range that extended to some of the north central states. So from this subspecies designation, you could see that the shrikes that we find in Ontario and Quebec are part of that number 5. Recent genetic work, though, has kind of updated these subspecies ranges, and those results now are shown in the colored areas. So there's been some updates since that initial sort of that initial list of 11 subspecies. So with that genetic work, it was revealed that the Ontario population is actually represents a unique genetic cluster, which is shown here in red. So it's actually significantly different from the rest of what had been considered migrans, which was in that sort of number 5 zone, which is now sort of extended, bleeds a little bit into number 2. And the rest of those birds are now considered centralis. And migrans is confined to that small red area. So there's been some back and forth on subspecies designations in recent years. I think when we last spoke in 2019, we were not calling them Eastern Loggerhead Shrikes. We were actually calling the subspecies alvarensis, or of the alvar. And then the subspecies in blue, we were calling migrans. But then after a couple of years of this, it was determined that the original genetic marker used to designate, the unique migrant subspecies was actually from a sample found in Ontario. So we effectively had to go back to calling the population in Ontario and Quebec migrans, and the rest of the Eastern subpopulation has returned to being known as centralis. So we're back to calling our birds in Ontario Eastern Loggerhead Shrikes. Very confusing and a little bit of a letdown from our perspective, since we really liked calling our birds alvarensis for a time. We thought that was really neat. But no matter the name, the birds that we have in this province and in Quebec, seen in red on the map there, are genetically distinct from the rest of those in the northeastern part of North America. So the birds that we have in Ontario and in Quebec are really, really special. And if we zoom in and we take a closer look at that part of the map, these core areas are where we've had breeding pairs of Eastern Loggerhead Shrike show up in the past. So the yellow star there is where Hamilton is, to just kind of give you some context here. So there were originally sort of 6 core areas identified, but most of these isolated populations have kind of all but disappeared. And now all that's left are the Carden and Napanee alvars, though birds will still show up in the other cores every now and then. But when you look closely at the habitat in these areas, it's pretty clear why these have kind of become sort of the last strongholds of these birds in Ontario. And it's because both of these cores contain alvar grassland habitat, which looks kind of like this. This is a photo that was taken of one of our habitat patches in Napanee. So this type of grassland is really ideal for Eastern Loggerhead Shrikes because they prefer really short vegetation scattered with high lookout perches, hunting perches, and nest trees, things like that. And the loggerhead shrike is a visual predator, so this landscape sort of allows them to easily spot their prey on the ground. The soil is really shallow, so it doesn't really support a lot of plant growth. And because of that, this land is not really used for crops all that much, but instead it's used for quite a bit for livestock, which ends up working out really well because cattle grazing on this landscape keeps the vegetation nice and short, which is ideal for shrikes. But unfortunately, this habitat, this type of habitat is increasingly under threat, which is part of the reason why our loggerhead shrikes in Ontario are in decline. So other threats in addition to habitat loss include, an increase in extreme and erratic weather events from climate change. Goodness knows that is a threat to all of us at this point. Other threats include predation. I know this raccoon is so cute, but if he were to find a nest of young, he would gobble up those young and those eggs without hesitation. Another threat includes roadside mortality through vehicle collisions. Shrikes are the type of birds that really like to fly low across these agricultural rural roads, which is a perfect opportunity for them to get hit by a car. So the importance of each of these threats is still unclear, but there was an analysis that we performed in 2009 that suggested that, in fact, the biggest problems for our birds were not necessarily happening in their breeding grounds in Ontario and Quebec, but more so on their overwintering grounds. So again, what makes Eastern Loggerhead shrikes unique as a subspecies is that they are migratory, which means they make a seasonal journey south into the United States each year to follow food sources. And then in the springtime, they take advantage of all the unoccupied habitat up here and return to breed and raise young. So it's been suggested that overwintering survival is kind of the most sensitive factor. So the biggest hits to our birds are kind of happening outside of our borders. So how exactly do we help Eastern Loggerhead shrikes? Well, because the list of threats is really broad, we kind of need to take a broad recovery approach. So our 4 main areas of focus include watching the wild population closely, restoring and taking care of shrike habitat, working closely with partners in the United States, and of course, conservation, breeding, and release. So I'm just going to go through these 4 focuses just as quickly as I can. So we watch wild populations closely to make sure, we know where they are and where they like to raise their young so that we can protect the habitat around their homes. And we are able to kind of figure out who is who by giving wild birds a unique combination of color bands in addition to the numbered steel band that we apply to our bird legs. And these combinations sort of allow us to identify who's who out in the field. And that second piece, that second focus that I mentioned, we participate in a lot of habitat stewardship projects. Like I had mentioned, most of the shrikes in Carden and Napanee live on cow pasture. So we partner with landowners to do everything we can to keep cows on the land, doing what they do best, which is keeping vegetation nice and short, which is ideal for shrikes. So this would include repairing fences, erecting gates, installing, feeding or water troughs, shrub thinning or piling in overgrown areas. So we collaborate quite a bit with landowners in the area to just kind of keep the cattle on the land and doing what they do best. So we also work closely with bird banders and researchers in the United States, since Eastern Loggerhead shrikes migrate into the States over the winter important for us to work together with US partners so we can conserve shrikes throughout their entire life cycle when they're breeding up here in Canada and when they're overwintering further south. I'm a little distracted by, I don't know if everyone can hear, but I have a cockatiel downstairs who has decided to start singing. So just enjoy those beautiful notes while I continue with my presentation here.
Jane, I couldn't tell if that was like a dog barking or like a hamster running on a wheel. But you're all good. All good.
Okay, perfect.
Let me use this as a chance as well to remind folks if they have a question to put it in the Q&A. We already have a bunch in there, so if you've got questions for Jane, put them in the Q&A. Okay, it's going awesome. You're doing great. Keep going.
Okay, perfect. Hopefully my internet hasn't cut out. And apologies. I would think this group would tolerate my bird noises in the background. Okay. As I was saying, last but certainly not least, we have our conservation, breeding, and release program, which is a very important piece to Eastern Loggerhead Shrike recovery. So we have a population of breeding pairs that raise their young at partner facilities, including the Toronto Zoo and African Lion Safari here in Ontario. So once these young have grown and are independent from their parents, so they're eating on their own, they're not relying on their parents for food, they're exhibiting all the behaviors that shrike should, they are transferred to our field release sites in Carden and Napanee. And then they are placed in field enclosures and released into the wild to give the wild population a boost. And when the birds are released, it's done using what we call a soft release technique, which is meant to sort of ease the transition to the wild. For comparison, a hard release would essentially involve sort of taking the birds to a field, opening the carrier to set them free and then sort of walking away. But with a soft release, shrikes have at least 1 week in their enclosures to get used to their surroundings. We give them supplemental food for up to a week once they've been released to sort of soften the transition to the wild. And this kind of helps ensure that we're releasing the fittest young with the best chance of survival in the wild. And since we started releasing birds in 2001, we've released over 1,400 captive bred young back into the wild. And so far, these released birds have been pretty effective at slowing the declines that we're seeing in the wild population. So the return rates for our captive raised birds have been in line with those of wild birds and even higher in some years. And in recent field seasons, captive bred birds have made up 20 to 30% of the birds found in Ontario. And they've produced a third to a half of the fledglings that we observe in the wild. So the captive breeding program really does have sort of, at least for now, sort of a stabilizing effect on the wild population. So we band our young that we release in the same way that we band our wild birds. And in addition to banding these young, we outfit a subset of them with radio tags, which are tracked on the Motus wildlife tracking system. So the radio towers look like this. This is a Motus tower that we put up in one of our field sites in Napanee. If a radio tagged bird passes within a certain distance of a tower like this, then the signal will get picked up and the data will be recorded. So there are right now there are many towers like this that have been put up all over North America, especially on the eastern seaboard. I'm just noticing that, not so much on the west, but yeah, no, there quite an extensive network of Motus towers that have been erected all over the continent. which is fantastic because this should kind of give us a pretty good idea of where exactly these birds are migrating to in the winter, which is still sort of a bit of a mystery. So these are the migratory paths of some of our released birds. So each line, you can see each line is a different color, and each color is a different individual. So, so you can see the picture on the left. It shows migratory paths of birds that, let's see, oh yeah, so this one is from 2017. So it looks like the majority of them kind of followed Lake Ontario and the Great Lakes down sort of southwest. And then the picture on the right is from 2018, where it looks like there were some individuals that just decided to go straight south and down sort of across Lake Ontario there. And again, the star is just to show you where Hamilton is, just to kind of give you some context there. So you can see that a lot of our birds will pass kind of straight through the GTA on their migratory journeys. So this brings me to to one shrike in particular. Speaking of shrikes passing through the GTA along their migratory journeys, we had some pretty exciting traveler sightings in 2021. The most notable of which was a shrike that was seen for a few days at Port Weller East Pier in the Niagara region this past September. So yeah, so there were many birders, including a few people that I know. They flocked down to the area where the shrike was first reported, and everyone was able to observe this individual. He was hunting grasshoppers and dragonflies at the tip of the pier. He seemed to be sort of unaffected by everyone watching him, and what observers noted was that he was sporting a radio tag, and he was also outfitted with a numbered leg band. So these pictures were sent to us by a photographer named Daniel Pay. No, some of you may know this individual, but he took these pictures and was able to actually zoom in to the band, which allowed us to collect sort of a partial band combination. If you tilt your head a little bit, you can see a 2, maybe a 4, and a 6. But because this bird was sporting a radio tag, this actually told us it was one of 12 hatch-year juveniles of captive origin that received a radio tag transmitter this year before release. So we only tag a subset of our birds that we release. And this past year, we tagged 12 individuals. So it was one of those 12. And then by the looks of this band, we will apply one size 1D numbered stainless steel bands. Sometimes shrikes can receive size 2 steel bands. So because from this picture, we could tell that this band was of a heavier caliber. So we could tell that it was a size 2 band. And then based on that partial band combo, it told us who the individual was. And this individual was released from our field site in Carden on August 18th. And he showed up in St. Catharines. He showed up around the beginning of September. So this is pretty exciting. So we were able to find out that this individual, so he was released up near Aurelia. Carden is the Carden field release site is somewhat close to Aurelia, and he was able to make his way down to St. Catharines over the span of a couple weeks, which is very, very exciting, especially because he was able to pass through the GTA, which, as we all know, can be quite the dangerous hurdle for a migrating bird. So super, super exciting. The Shrike is radio tagged, so we will have a chance to gather more information on his migratory journey eventually. But in the meantime, it was really, really amazing to receive reports, that the bird was hunting and behaving the way it should, because this was a captive reared bird, and he was released up in our Carden site. And the last time a loggerhead shrike was observed in the Niagara region was in the 60s. So it was really, really exciting for those in the area and for the recovery team at WPC. We do have our fingers crossed that that this shrike has a safe winter and returns to Carden in the spring to breed. So far he's doing great. So what else is new since we last spoke? Well, this past year was extremely exciting for the Loggerhead Shrike Recovery Program. We had 24 pairs of Loggerhead Shrike that were confirmed in our 2 core areas in Napanee and Carden. So 14 in Napanee, 9 in Carden, and 1 actually in Smiths Falls, which is one of those historic core areas near the Ottawa area, if you remember my original map. So this number doesn't sound spectacular. However, with that said, the Napanee pair count increased over 25% compared to 2020, and the Carden pair count more than doubled. So, I mean, staff effort was admittedly limited in 2020, especially in the Carden region. We weren't able to hire a full complement of field biologists for the 2020 season due to obvious pandemic related reasons. So comparisons to last year, can be viewed with a level of skepticism, but we also see the same increases when comparing 2021 results to 2019. So this is still a very exciting year for us. And this was also the 3rd consecutive year that a pair was observed in the Smiths Falls core, which is out toward the Ottawa area, like I said. And the pair was found on the same habitat patch that was occupied in 2020. So the pairs that return to breed, they're quite loyal to their habitat patches. They sometimes come to breed in the exact same nest tree as earlier years, which is really exciting. Another really amazing result from this past year, all pairs observed in Napanee this year fledged young, as did all but 1 pair in Carden, with a total of 78 fledglings that were observed. So 52 in Napanee, 26 in Carden. This is more juveniles that have been observed since 2012. And it more than doubles the recent low count of 34 fledglings that were observed in 2019. So super, super exciting. We can attribute it to a high nesting success rate in Napanee. I guess 94% of all nests were successfully fledged young in Napanee versus 70% in Carden. And then we also had a lot of birds that double brooded. So double brooding has been kind of a somewhat uncommon thing up in Ontario in this far north. Further south, you'll find loggerhead shrikes that it's quite common for them to double brood, sometimes even triple brood. But up here, we've only seen double brooding recently in 2019, 2016, and 2012. But this year, 29% of females. Oh, I should be advancing my slides here. Whoops, I have some cute pictures of fledglings. Here we go. Yeah, so we had 29% of females observed in Napanee this year that successfully double brooded, and those females accounted for 24 of the fledglings seen in the region. So it was really, really, we had a couple females out there that were really, really successful, which is fantastic. Some interesting articles that have been published since we last spoke. We have published a method for sexing shrike based on their 6th primary feather. So this is how we sex the majority of captive reared juveniles that we released, and one of the ways that we sex wild birds in the field. So I'll give you the inside scoop here. So the top left wing is that of a female. So if you count to the 6th primary here, also there we go. You can see there's a distinct pattern of brown to white, and you can see that the feather shaft of that feather, so the middle of that feather, is entirely brown. So if the brown in the shaft extends all the way up to those little feathers, those primary covert feathers, this is a female. And you can also look at the brown to white pattern. If it's more asymmetrical, or if it looks more like a V, this also indicates a female. So if you compare this, or if you compare that, I should say rather, to this 6th primary, you can see the brown on the shaft stops halfway up. So you can see it kind of transitions into white before getting to those primary coverts there. So this would actually indicate a male, and the brown to white patterning is also more symmetrical, and it almost looks like an M, which is a great mnemonic because that reminds you that this is a male that we're looking at. So really, really exciting. So that paper has been published since we last spoke. Other notable publications, we've observed lots of interactions with anthropogenic materials or human-made, human-related materials. So this was an interesting observation reported down in Indiana of a shrike impaling a piece of bacon in a habitat patch near an urban area. So yeah, the field biologists got a kick out of it. So they were able to get the observation published. But we have had many other reports of shrikes interacting with human-related materials, such as this. Still don't know what it is. It almost looks like it's a piece of plastic debris. It looks like it might be torn from, possibly even from like a little plastic bug toy, like a child's toy or something. But this observation was seen down in the States, and the observer noted, at first she thought it was it was an inchworm or something that had been impaled on some barbed wire, but then she went back a couple of weeks later and realized that the inchworm remained unchanged, and then she got a closer look and she thought, this is a piece of plastic debris. So we have had, so we took this observation, and we also compiled it with other observations of shrikes incorporating plastic into their nests. And we were able to publish a paper on all of these observations of shrikes interacting, behaving, or interacting with all these pieces of plastic debris in different ways. Of course, it's concerning to see, that they're impaling pieces of plastic, because that it might lead one to think that they would possibly be accidentally ingesting these pieces of plastic, which we all know can be very, very harmful to birds. And when we see pieces of plastic debris incorporated into nests, this is super, super concerning, because as nestlings grow, these pieces of plastic debris can become can become wrapped around nestling legs, and the nestlings won't develop properly, or they'll get entangled in the nest and then get entangled when they try to branch or when they try to fledge. So we've actually had field biologists find some nestlings that have perished trying to leave their nest because they've been intertwined with some plastic, which is of course very, very concerning. So we see a lot of plastic baling twine. This picture is very interesting because it looks like it's just like a grocery bag or something. So that was a very interesting one. But usually it's thinner pieces of plastic like baling twine, things like that. So we're also in the middle of a series of conservation planning workshops for the loggerhead shrike that will involve sort of an in-depth population analysis, which will kind of increase our understanding of the threats that are influencing the population and lead to a more rigorous long-term conservation plan. So this process is very exciting. It's including a whole bunch of different stakeholders, a whole bunch of different rights holders, and the results will help identify how and when the species is being limited. It'll identify, high priority habitat patches for protection. It'll identify how we can use the conservation breeding and release program to ensure it best supports the wild population. So it's a very, very exciting, it's a long drawn out process, but it's very exciting, and hopefully the analysis should be completed at the end of this year. So all in all, the loggerhead shrike recovery program is going strong. This year promises results that will help us get just a little bit closer to the program vision, which is a thriving population of loggerhead shrikes in Eastern Canada that lives in harmony with local communities. So if anyone would like to learn more about the program or to donate, you can visit our website, which has been on the right-hand side of the screen there. And of course, if you see a shrike, we would love to know about it. We always have our eye on eBird and Discord, but we'll always be looking out for as many details of the sightings as possible. So if you see something, please email us, birds@wildlifepreservation.ca. I know there are many of you who bird in Carden. So shoot me an email, send me a text. If you see a sighting, let me know. We love to hear from you. And I guess on that note, if you have any questions for me, or if you'd like to get in touch with me, my email is janespero@wildlifepreservation.ca. And that, thank you, Jackson. That's it for me.
Yes.
Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Jane. The Q&A has 18 questions in it, which is the most I've seen in the longest time. Some of them are from our family, and others are, I think someone asked some in person. So we're gonna give people a few opportunities here, and I'm gonna start. We'll start with some of these questions that are in the Q&A, and just kind of tackle these one at a time. Okay, so, and some are kind of likened. So HT, who I think might be Helen Teresa, says, are they unusual to be a predator and a songbird? So I often hear of people mentioning that, like, they're a hunting songbird. Like, so is that unusual to be a predator and a songbird? What are your thoughts to that question?
Ooh, well, they are super unique. I feel like they're a songbird, but they behave in all respects as a predator. And let's see, well, we have many learned birders here, but yeah, for the most part, songbirds, you have songbirds that are seed eaters, you have songbirds that are insectivores, you have songbirds that, like crows and jays and ravens, that would very well act as predators if they came along something that was alive and a tasty morsel. A lot of songbirds are opportunistic in that way, and they'll they'll eat what they can, and they'll forage what they can. But yeah, no, shrikes are really, really exciting predators that just so happen to be songbirds. I love that they don't have those strong feet, but they've adapted for that lack of power in their feet by using tools like barbed wire and thorns and things like that. And they have that tomial tooth on the top part of their beak, so that little notch in their beak that helps them sever the spinal cord of their prey. But yeah, in general, songbirds that are predators. Who am I missing? Yeah,
you had it right with like they are predators of a lot of things anyways. I think it's just we think raptors, so you think shrike eats the similar things to a raptor, but it's not a raptor, it's a songbird. What's a songbird? There's so many different species of songbirds. So yeah, good answer on that one. And we'll keep going because there are quite a few questions here. So and HT does ask a couple more, and I'll lump. Do males and females look the same is one that she asked. With another question that was asked by George Bryant, which you did kind of answer, can you sex these birds when in the hand? So yeah, so if you can just go over that again. Do males and females look the same? Can you sex them in the hand? Just to cover that again.
Yeah, so by just looking at them through the scope or through binoculars, you can't really tell. I don't think, oh, you can't really, you certainly cannot tell the difference looking at them visually. Some would say that you would be able to tell the difference. Oh, I'm getting off topic here. I mean, you would be able to tell the difference between a male and a female behaviorally. So if one were singing, or if you happened upon a nest and you saw one that was brooding, then that would be a female. But no, generally, no, you can't really tell them apart. If you do have them in hand, you can sex them by that sixth primary. So the patterning on a certain part of their wing, which is really, really exciting. I said this is one of the ways that you can sex them. If you have a female in hand, she sometimes might have a brood patch. So if you're at the right time of the year and you have a bird in hand, if it's a female, you could tell by the sixth primary, or you can also look to see whether or not she has a nice bare patch on her chest to incubate her eggs.
Space Monkey said, did I see that there were small whiskers on their head? And I was surprised to learn that birds have little whiskers on them from time to time. So yeah, Space Monkey, you did see some whiskers, whoever you are. Lots of good praise coming in, but there's lots of really great questions here. So Janet Harrison wants to know, are northern shrikes and loggerhead shrikes similar as juveniles?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've never seen a juvenile northern shrike. I do not know what they look like.
They look kind of similar, I think. I've only ever seen a couple northern shrikes and never a loggerhead, but I have heard that they do have that similar brown, rusty.
Yeah. So when I said I specified adult loggerhead shrikes will look different in ways from a northern shrike, because juvenile loggerhead shrikes have that barred chest. So they don't have that really pretty, nice, clean white chest. So they kind of look similar to northern shrikes when they have that kind of the barring on their chest. So yeah, so juvenile loggerheads kind of look similar to northern shrike adults, but northern shrike juveniles, I'm not sure what they look like.
All right. Roughly, how many loggerhead shrike have been introduced into Carden, in particular by Toronto Zoo, over the past 20 or 30 years? And this was asked again by George Bryant.
I think the number is around 300 specifically via Toronto Zoo. So I said since our program began, we've released over 1,400 shrikes. In the early years, we did some releases up in sort of Grey Bruce. Carden was a long-standing release site. We did some releases in Quebec as well. We did some releases in Breckenridge and Smiths Falls. But generally, these days, we split our releases between Carden and Napanee. So for the most part, it's certainly moving forward. An even number, it's an even split between Carden and Napanee. But for Toronto Zoo specifically, I think it's around, yeah, it's over 300 birds, because Toronto Zoo has been involved with the program from the get-go.
George also wonders, has there been any evidence of gene transfer between the Ontario populations and the nearest populations in Pennsylvania and West Virginia?
Yes. Yeah, the population demographics are all over the place, and it's a lovely, ever-changing mystery that we're constantly trying to solve. And I think this population and habitat viability analysis is going to provide us with some answers. But we have researchers who we collaborate with, who are on our team, who their life's work is looking at different the gene differences between the subspecies. And yes, it's such, goodness me, it's such a confusing mess. There are some of our birds that will, they will migrate south for the winter, and then sometimes they'll decide not to come back. They'll stay for a year down in Pennsylvania or something, and then they'll pop back up. They'll show up years later, back in Carden, sometimes even back in a different core. They'll pop up in Napanee. So the ever-changing dynamics and demographics of the different populations is very, very interesting, and it's quite tough to solve, but we're getting there.
Cool. So this kind of plays off of that. George wants to know, does Napanee actually have more shrike habitat than Carden alvar?
Ooh, that's a good question. That is a good question. I'm not sure which site has more habitat patches. Yeah, that would be something that I would have to look up. Certainly in Napanee, a lot more of our shrike habitat is being sort of transformed, changed into solar farms. And up in Carden, there's a lot of development from limestone quarries. So both habitats are quite extensive, but both are being affected and being fragmented in different ways. But no, as of right now, I'm not sure which core is bigger per se. But Napanee, we've been having more birds. So Napanee has 14 pairs, and that's been, in recent years, we've had more pairs in Napanee and less in Carden. So that would maybe suggest that Napanee might have more ideal habitat.
Okay. I mean, you're releasing them there for a reason, so that's good. And being done scientifically and under the watchful eye of the wildlife preservation team. Which Dale wants to know: will the WPC be looking to expand habitat grounds in Smith Falls? You may not be able to answer that. I don't know.
Yes, we're hoping to, especially with the results of this population viability analysis, we're hoping to get shrike back into those historic areas. So we want shrike back on Manitoulin, we want shrike back on Grey Bruce, we want shrike back in Smith Falls. So ideally, eventually, we will want to have release sites at those cores. Certainly in Smiths Falls, what's fantastic with the conservation breeding and release program, we have a few facilities in Quebec who are coming on board, and they will be coming on as breeding partners. So it'll be fantastic because we have those shrike that are showing up in Smiths Falls closer to Quebec. It will be great to have sort of facility representation over there out east.
I tell you what, I want a Modus Tower somewhere in the HSA. I think, well, I guess the Grimsby Wetlands has one. But yeah, those things seem super cool. Can you just, I'm just asking this off the top of my head. When you band birds, are you giving all of them the telemetry backpacks, or selecting like 1 out of every 10 or something like that? Or maybe I missed that part.
Yeah, so we only tag a subset of them, and I think it might be because of one of our this like stipulations in our permits. Though the tags that we are deploying they have to be under a certain weight. So the reason why when we release our birds, we will give them a full complement of fancy leg bands. But for the radio tagged birds that we release, because we're adding that extra weight, we can only give them 1 or 2 leg bands because we don't want to overburden them. So it might have something to do with that, but yeah, no, we only release up to half of our birds with radio tags.
Okay.
As
we have a ton more questions to go, so they keep flooding in.
Sorry.
No worries. This is great. This is exactly what we'd love to see. Shay Smith wants to know, has there been any recorded hybridization between northern and loggerhead shrikes?
I was thinking about that, but I don't think there is, because they breed at in different spaces. If they bred in the same areas, I think that would be more of a question. But I think because northern shrikes breed way far north compared to where loggerhead shrikes breed, I don't think there's that much mixing.
Okay, cool. Space Monkey is mom. So either your mom or mine.
Who's mom? Okay.
Probably yours. So there's an answer to that one. I thought it might have been our cousin Tyler. Okay. How many breeding pairs can inhabit a hectare? No. That's that was asked by Janet. But again, and that might be tough to answer. Do you know?
That's a really good question. Yeah, how big are their territories? I don't know offhand. But there have been a few nests within a habitat patch, but our habitat patches are all different sizes. But they can be fairly close together depending on the habitat type. Depending on if it's really ideal habitat, then you can sometimes get a couple pairs nesting on one patch. But how close have the closest nested together, and how big are their territories? That's a good question. I don't know.
No worries. It's all good. I never even would have thought of that. Okay, so Colleen Riley says, I sent Hazel photos of a group of 3 youngster loggerheads last summer. Is it helpful to have people send you shots we get in the garden? Like you personally? Do you have an ideal method of that for that?
Ooh, sending them to Hazel is fantastic. Birds at Wildlife Preservation Canada gets emails from there get funneled to Hazel directly. And if I get any photos, you can send them to me. I will funnel them to Hazel. So Hazel, the lead biologist, she's more in charge of wild population monitoring and surveying. Hence, she would probably know right off the top of her head exactly how big territories are. But no, if you have photos, and if you do have photos, that's absolutely fantastic. Send them to me, send them to birds@wildlifepreservation.ca, sending them to birds at Wildlife Preservation would send them straight to Hazel. So that's absolutely fine.
Okay, cool. When are captive raised birds released? June, July, or August?
Yeah, so they're released in July and August, sometimes at the end of June. They're released at a minimum of around 44 days old. That's enough time for them. They fledge around 20 days. So that's enough time for them to figure out how to get things done. They're becoming independent. They're eating on their own. They're hunting on their own. And they're becoming more independent from their parents. They're actually separated from their parents, but they're still in adjacent units, kind of like this picture here. So they can still interact with them, but they're gradually getting weaned to kind of full independence. So typically birds will be paired in April, and then they'll have their first clutches, late April, May, and then we release at 44 days post hatching. So that usually takes us to kind of end of June, July, August. Anyway, I'll stop there because I'm sure we have a ton more questions.
Yeah, no, it's all good. That's all good. The longer I bird, the more now I'm starting to learn more a little bit about migration habits and stuff. And I was reading through Birds of Hamilton while you were presenting just to see what kind of information about loggerhead shrike were. And there've only been 11 records since 1977 of loggerhead shrike in the HSA, which is pretty crazy. And yeah, March seems to be the big time for them, both them and northern shrike. But anyways, I digress. Peter Tom says to Jane, are loggerhead shrikes as susceptible to cowbird parasitism as other passerines of similar size, or do you think their preferred habitat does not match that of cowbirds?
Yeah, there aren't many cowbirds in the alvars. I was actually reading a paper wherein they're pretty good at rejecting eggs that are not theirs. So they did a study back in the day, and I can send this out later if anyone's interested. They put in fake eggs, and the shrikes were rejected 100% of the eggs, the parasitic eggs, which I thought was pretty neat. But no, for the most part, yeah, you're getting, grasshopper sparrows, meadowlarks, a lot of thrashers, brown thrashers. But yeah, cowbirds not as present out there,
Cool.
to my knowledge.
Ron says, will the recording be available after this meeting? I hope so, Ron. But he also says, or they also say, which organizations in Ontario do you work with to inform the public and to raise shrikes?
Yeah, so for our partner breeding facilities, we partner with Toronto Zoo and African Lion Safari in Ontario. Mountsburg Conservation Center used to be a breeding facility, but they ended their involvement a couple years ago. We also have some partner breeding facilities down in the States. So we work with the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute. We also work with Nashville Zoo in Tennessee. And like I said, we have some facilities coming on board in Quebec, which will be fantastic. And then we work with a lot of land trusts and other nonprofit organizations. So out in Carden, we work with Couchiching Conservancy, which has a lot of most of the land where we find the shrikes. And then in Napanee, we work with the Napanee Plains Joint Initiative and the Nature Conservancy of Canada. They have a lot of land out there that we work on.
Very cool. I took a picture of the bacon hanging from hanging from barbed wire, which either was a cruel joke meant to mess with birders or an actual thing a shrike did. So Janet says, she says, so shrikes are using visual clues to hunt. Bacon doesn't look like a regular.
I know.
Could they smell the meat? Was that Was that the cue when they were close enough to check it out? Thoughts?
Oh, so I think the field biologist actually observed a shrike doing it. Otherwise, because I would otherwise be really, really skeptical. Just someone randomly wrapping bacon on a branch of a tree. But so songbirds don't really have a great sense of smell, so I wouldn't think that it would be the smell that would draw them in. I don't know. Maybe the shrike was curious and like picked at it and I don't know. Maybe it was more of a behavioral thing, and he was just creating his larder in his territory to attract and impress females, and he wasn't actually planning on eating it.
We had a presentation by Dr. Leanne Greaves, which was all about birds and their senses of smell. So yeah, maybe it just happened to be so close to something that it caught a whiff of someone frying some bacon up. Either way, so unusual. Someone else wondered if that plastic piece perhaps was a fish lure that was hanging up there as well. Who knows? A couple more questions as we round out here because it is 9 o'clock. But that's okay. Peter Tome suggests that the long-tailed shrike of Central Asia sings beautifully, going back to their song. So Jane says, would you consider raptors not just a predator, but a competitor of the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike in the murid sense?
Yeah, so American kestrels occupy the same niche, and they seem to kind of, so in that sense you would kind of expect them to be competitors, but and I've observed released shrikes chasing off a kestrel, which was so cool. I thought at first that it would actually, that perhaps the kestrel would be a predator to the shrike, but it seemed like they could very well hold their own and they were actually chasing it off. So yeah, so they're kind of in a bit of a they're kind of competing for the same niche, but
Cool.
that's about the extent of it. Yeah.
I've never heard the term murid before, so thank you, Janet. I just looked it up. Murid, a rodent of a very large family, which includes most kinds of rats, mice, and voles. So thank you for helping me learn a new term. Okay, so is it more dangerous for this bird to pass through the GTA because of the amount of light pollution? Asks Helen Teresa.
Ooh. They are not nocturnal migrants, but actually we're still trying to figure that out. We have a PhD student who is doing a study on migratory urge and when it is being expressed at what time of the year and at what time of day. So I think so far, and she's using little accelerometers, and she's using them on the captive birds. So she's able to collect movement of the shrikes during migratory periods to see when exactly they're wanting to migrate. And I think, yeah, maybe a portion of them were more active at night. Yeah, so light pollution is always a big hazard for nocturnal migrants.
Okay.
Though I think they're like they move in the day as well. So yeah, no, always a hazard for.
Yeah, lights. I mean, that's something, I wrote down, the bird friendly city team because, they will be, I think, pushing a lights out campaign around here in the spring. It's good to do anyways, regardless of the species, because goodness sakes, like we need as many around as possible. We need communities rallying behind birds, which this next question from Marianne Thompson. Will the Ford government plan to build a new highway encroach on the shrike's habitat? Something to make noise about and change our voting, perhaps?
Yeah, for sure. The Brampton bypass or highway
Either, I guess.
413 or whatever it is. I think they're affecting wetland species more. So I'm not sure if they're as yet if Cardin and Napanee are as yet going to be affected by those bypasses, but certainly yeah, if this is something that is close to your heart, please, please. We do have an election coming up. So actually, this is another article that I can share afterwards. But yes, the PC government have been in some ways dropping the ball with helping conservationists and species at risk, but that's a conversation for another time.
That's a whole other presentation.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're wrapping up here. Marianne Thompson says, thank you for such an informative session, Jackson and Jane. Really enjoyed it. Neil Gray, good presentation. Thanks. Neil Gray, president of the Couchiching Conservancy. So thank you, Marianne and Neil. Dina says, hi, Jane. Thanks for sharing about hearing the Great Horned Owls duet. My husband and I heard Great Horned Owls duet at 1:30 a.m. on January 5th in Grimsby. Yes, it was indeed a beautiful duet. Male's lower pitch hoots followed by female's hoots.
Yes.
Owl's nighttime refrain. Who's awake? Me too. Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you, Dina. So you weren't alone. We are getting in that owl mating time right now. HT says, excellent, thorough, and optimistic presentation. Very proud of you both. HT, aka your aunt. Sam Hudecki, your brother, what is the most likely place to catch a glimpse of one of these evasive beauties? So I know you answered that perhaps earlier, but if you want to remind folks where to look out for one, now's the time.
Oh, I feel like the closest for us is go to Carden Alvar Provincial Park. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Sam saying, hey, can one of you take me there?
Yeah.
I think we should do like a family excursion.
Yes.
So a couple final questions for you. Ryan wants to know, what's Jane's favorite part of her job? And this is a great way to wrap up our presentation.
Well, I mean, I love working closely with the shrikes during the summer months. So I have the wonderful opportunity to to band them and to take measurements from them and to give them all their medications and whatnot before release. But I think the best part of my job, and my screen is still sharing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you can see this release cage and picture yourself there. So on our release mornings, we'll just open that. There's a little hatch at the far end of the release cage. And we'll just kind of hunker down in the bushes and make our observations. And the birds just kind of, they'll leave when they want. Some are really eager and they just fly out, and you see them soar into the sky for the first time without enclosure above their heads. It's like the most amazing thing to watch. And then others are a little skittish and they'll just kind of stay in the enclosure, and others will kind of slowly come out and hop around the top. But it's just so wonderful to see these birds released and thriving in their habitat.
Amazing. Well, I miss sharing a desk space with you at work.
Me too.
And getting a chance to do birding together, but I'm so proud and honored to be related to you. You're doing such great work, cousin. And so I can't wait to have you back in a couple more years to hear what you've been up to then. The last thing Janet says is, thanks so much, Jackson Jane. Following ELHS through TZ as a volunteer, although I'm not sure what TZ is. ELHS Lanny, the name Lanny was my baby. What's TZ? Is that
Toronto Zoo, I think.
Toronto Zoo.
Yeah.
So thanks, Janet, for tuning in. And there's still 50 people remaining. Jane, any last messages for the people before we part ways for the night?
Oh, thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. And give me a shout if you want to learn more.
Amazing. Okay, great. Well, 9:07. We had 40 different questions or comments put in the Q&A tonight, which is an incredible amount. So thank you everyone for attending tonight. Thank you for being here and checking out what's going on with the Loggerhead Shrike.
Eastern Loggerhead Shrike. Yeah.
Hopefully
you got it.
After all that, hopefully everyone will be back on February 28th to hear a chat about snowy owls. Jane, keep up the great work. Everyone stay safe out there, stay healthy, Connect with the club, connect with Jane, go birding where you can, and don't forget to have fun. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks again, Jane. On behalf of the HNC, you're the best, and we'll see you again later.